People don't usually prepare for the truth like it's a staged event. But sometimes when betrayal runs deep enough, you need the world to see exactly what someone tried to hide. I glanced at the signs one last time, making sure they were lined up exactly the way I'd planned. 2 days of crafting every word, every angle, every detail. And now came the real test, getting everything into place before my wife came home. With a slow, steady breath, I jogged up the stairs and headed straight for the master bedroom. The moment I stepped inside, something in me hardened. I yanked the sheets off, peeled the mattress away from the queen-sized frame and dragged, half carrying, half sliding, the heavy thing down the stairs. It scraped through the hallway, out the front door and onto the lawn, right by the street, where everyone could see it. And as I stepped back, catching my breath, watching the pieces fall into place exactly as I intended, a single thought pressed itself into my mind. She had no idea what was waiting for her. But by the time she pulled into that driveway, the whole neighborhood would. Stay with me, because what led to this moment, and what happened next, is a story you won't forget. Then I went back inside, grabbed the slats, the pillows, the blankets, everything, and tossed them down the stairs. They tumbled into a messy pile that I quickly hauled outside to join the mattress. One more trip upstairs, and I unhooked the side rails, carried them out, and dropped them onto the growing mound of furniture on the grass. I checked my watch, 4:22 p.m. Time was slipping away fast. I needed everything finished before 5 o'clock, so I got to work. By 4:35, the bed frame was reassembled perfectly, just not where it originally belonged. It now sat proudly on the front lawn for the entire neighborhood to witness. Next came the kitchen table. It was light enough, so I tilted it sideways, maneuvered it through the door, and placed it beside the bed like some kind of yard sale centerpiece. After that, I rolled up the 6x8 throw rug from the living room, marched it outside, and lined it up neatly with the others. Once everything was in place, I planted the signs, ensuring they were positioned high enough so no one could easily pull them down. When I finally stepped back, I checked the time again. 4:55 p.m. 5 minutes to spare. I stood in the middle of the street and admired the scene. Honestly, it nearly brought tears to my eyes, not because I was sad but because of how painfully perfect it looked. Our marriage bed, our kitchen table, our rug. 3 places where my wife and her lover had spent half a year desecrating everything our marriage stood for. Each piece of furniture had its own sign, big, bold, and impossible to ignore. I walked to the first one and read the message aloud. Free for anyone who can bear the stench of infidelity. These items are no longer wanted in this home. Above the bed, another sign explained exactly what my wife had been doing there for 6 months. The kitchen table sign described their little sessions before she served me dinner. The throw rug? That one detailed their preference for that spot, complete with a photo. Yes, every sign had a 17x24-inch photograph of my wife and her boss in the act, caught in moments they thought no one would ever see. Behind the table, a 5th sign identified her partner in crime. Greg Ryan, married, father of 3, and my wife's boss at Mitchell Price and Ryan Realty. Unaware his world is about to collapse. I checked the time again. 4:57. Right on cue. I noticed neighbors starting to gather. Cars slowed down. People pulled out their phones. Some were calling their friends. Others were calling the cops. I gave them a casual nod, walked back inside, and closed the door behind me, calm as ever. Then at 5 o'clock sharp, her car appeared. She turned the corner and immediately slowed down, confusion distorting her expression. Her eyes darted from the bed, to the signs, to the photos. Even from behind her closed window, I heard her scream. No. Oh God, and no. 40, maybe 50 people were already gathered, and every one of them watched her face crumble. Through the front window she saw me standing there. We locked eyes, mine steady and unreadable, hers wet with panic. She looked as if the world had just caved in. I stared at her for a long moment, then simply closed the curtain. And now, perhaps it's finally time to explain how we ended up here, how my wife, Amy, and I went from a seemingly perfect marriage to this catastrophic end. My name is Justin Meyer. I met Amy in our junior year of college. A mutual friend had introduced us, and from the moment I saw her, something inside me shifted. She wasn't the most traditional kind of beautiful, but there was something magnetic about her. She was petite, 5 feet 2 inches, with bright blue eyes, shoulder-length blonde hair, and a kind of effortless charm that pulled you in without warning. Within weeks, we were inseparable. A month later, we shared our first intimate moment, and it felt like we had crossed into a new world together. We weren't inexperienced, but the connection we had was unlike anything I'd ever felt. We were passionate, obsessed, deeply in love. We graduated. We married. Bought our first condo. She went into real estate. I became a senior engineer in medical equipment. We eventually upgraded to our dream home. We had children, Shelby and Ryan, our pride and joy. 13 years of what I believed was pure stability, happiness, family. So what went wrong? I wish I knew the exact moment. Maybe it was always there. Maybe I ignored the signs. Maybe I trusted too deeply. But everything unraveled because of one unexpected phone call. It was a Thursday, just before noon. Shelby had Ryan ill at school, and the nurse called me because they couldn't reach Amy, neither at her office nor on her cell phone. I rushed out of my meeting, drove to the school, and picked up my daughter. She was pale, tired, and leaning against me for comfort. I brought her home, and that's when everything changed. When I opened the garage door, I froze. There, parked in my space, was a car I had never seen in my life, right beside my wife's. A cold, sinking feeling spread through me. I told myself I was imagining things, that there had to be a logical explanation. But the garage door was closed. The car was hidden. And deep down, I already knew the truth. I didn't want Shelby to see anything, so I told her a lie, my first lie to her ever. I said the exterminator was inside spraying chemicals and she needed to wait in the car. She was too sick to argue much, only confused. I checked the house. The moment I stepped inside, I knew. But instead of confronting them right then, I realized something. If I just burst in, there would be yelling, excuses, denials. I didn't want rage. I wanted justice. I wanted precision. I wanted a revenge they would never forget. So I dropped Shelby off with my mother, kept my mouth shut, and went back to work as if nothing had happened. I needed a plan. A perfect one. My office shared a building with another division, commercial security. And one of the best engineers I knew worked there, Roy Taylor. Smart, trustworthy, loyal. I told my secretary not to disturb me and asked Roy to come over. When he walked into my office 20 minutes later, he took one look at me and said, "Justin, you look like you've seen a ghost." And that was when I finally began to tell the story. When I finally sat down with Roy, I laid everything out, the shocking discovery I had stumbled into hours earlier. I told him slowly and painfully that I had walked in on my wife and her boss, in our own home, in our bedroom. His face twisted in disbelief, but I assured him every detail was real. I explained how I'd come home early to grab my daughter from school, only to find the two of them tangled up where my family slept. I didn't confront them. My daughter was in the car waiting, and her safety came before my rage. So I quietly backed out of the house, drove her straight to my mom's, and kept everything inside until the moment I saw Roy. He listened, jaw tight, and then asked the question everyone asks, "What are you planning to do now?" I didn't have an exact plan, but I knew I needed proof. Evidence. Something undeniable. I told him I intended to record them, video, audio, whatever I could get. That's when I asked for his help getting cameras and microphones hidden around the house. Roy wasn't convinced another encounter would even happen. He suggested maybe this was a one-time slip, but I shut that down immediately. I had overheard enough between my wife and her boss. 6 months of secret meetings planned during work hours, using my empty home as their private getaway. There wasn't anywhere else they could go, and they certainly weren't stopping now. After a long moment of silence, Roy finally nodded and offered a solution. He mentioned he had access to a new beta line of wireless microcameras and tiny mics I could connect straight to my laptop. He even had a voice-activated recorder I could slide under my wife's car seat, good enough to catch her side of any conversation she had while driving. Not perfect, but better than nothing. I told him I'd swing by his office the next day to grab everything. Going home that night was harder than anything I'd ever done. I didn't know if I could look at her without everything boiling over. So I relied on truth disguised as an excuse. I told myself to act sick because honestly I felt sick. I picked up my daughter from my mom's and headed home, stomach twisting with every mile. When we walked in, Amy was in the kitchen prepping dinner. The moment she saw our daughter, panic washed over her face. I calmly asked where she'd been, and why she hadn't kept me updated about Shelby feeling ill, reminding her that the school nurse had left a message on the answering machine. She hurriedly explained that her phone must have been turned off while she was showing houses and that she'd been busy all day. Busy? Yeah, I had a pretty good idea what busy meant. Still, she hugged our daughter tightly and apologized before helping her to bed. Whatever else she was, she did love our kids. That part was real. It struck me then, maybe I was the only part of this family she didn't want anymore. She went back to the kitchen to finish dinner, and I used the moment to tell her I'd be sleeping in the guest room, claiming I didn't want to infect anyone if I was coming down with something. She touched my forehead and said I looked pale. She wasn't wrong. The irony wasn't lost on me. Betrayal can make anyone sick. I forced myself to step into our master bedroom to grab my toothbrush, clothes, and grooming stuff for work. The window was open, the room airing out. The smell that had hit me earlier was gone, and the bed was remade, fresh sheets. Of course she'd cleaned up their mess. For a second I could almost see him there, whispering whatever lies people in affairs like to tell each other. My blood boiled. But rage wasn't for now. I needed clarity. I needed patience. I needed justice, not an explosion. I gathered what I needed and retreated to the guest room. I closed the door, stripped to my underwear, laid down and stared into the dark. I wanted to break apart and cry, but I swallowed it all. There was work to do and I couldn't afford to crumble yet. Hours later, after tucking the kids in, she came into the guest room. I pretended to be asleep as she felt my forehead again before leaving quietly. That used to comfort me. Now it disgusted me. Since she normally handled the school drop-off, I woke up before sunrise, showered, grabbed my things, and slipped out of the house without waking her. She'd wonder why, but I didn't care. Let her think anything she wanted. I just needed distance. At work, before anyone else arrived, I brewed a pot of coffee and started planning my next moves. Step by step. Cancel our shared credit cards. Split our joint account and open my own. Update my will, life insurance, and 401k to remove her entirely. Name only the kids as beneficiaries. Contact a solid divorce attorney. 13 years of marriage undone in a list so short it barely filled a page. It should have hurt more. Maybe it would later. Being in a no-fault state meant her affair wouldn't change much financially, but it could help me maintain custody of my kids, something I wasn't willing to gamble with. She had made it clear I didn't mean much to her anymore, but she was still a good mother. I didn't want to take the children away. I just wanted to make sure I remained part of their lives. Every time the memory of what I heard, her praising her boss over me, started clawing back into my mind, I shut it down. That emotional collapse would come someday, but not today. Today I had a mission. Around noon, I called Roy to confirm the equipment. He said everything was ready and even offered to walk me through the setup. As I sifted through paperwork at my desk, my phone lit up. Amy's name. Her voice, usually warm and soft, now irritated me to my core. She asked how I was feeling and mentioned she hadn't been able to check on me before I left that morning. I kept my voice flat and distant. I told her I needed space. I needed to clear my head. And God, that was the understatement of the century. She floated a sweet little suggestion that evening, something she thought might cheer me up, but inside, all I felt was a tight knot of resentment mixed with the sting of betrayal she didn't even know I carried. Still, on the surface, I kept my voice flat and neutral, telling her we'd see. She picked up on the distance immediately. Amy asked why I was acting disinterested, and I quickly corrected her. Not uninterested, just distracted. We agreed to meet back home around 6. And she assured me she'd be in the office the entire day if I needed anything. After the call, I reached out to Roy. He confirmed everything was ready and told me to meet him at the loading dock. When I arrived, we loaded the equipment into his van, and together we started the installation. By 3:30, every device was mounted, tested, and working flawlessly. We set up the software on my home office computer, creating a hidden, encrypted folder where all video and audio files would automatically store. We planted cameras and mics in every important room, living room, kitchen, guest room, and especially the master bedroom. That room alone had 4 cameras positioned to capture every angle. And just in case the cheating couple decided to get bold and shower together, we placed another camera and microphone in the master bathroom. Everything was motion triggered. When the cameras woke up, so did the mics. I was ready. That night, the weight of everything nearly crushed me. After dinner, once the kids were tucked away, I followed my wife into the bedroom like a ghost. I rolled over, turned my back to her, and pretended to fall asleep. Naturally, she noticed the shift in our routine. She asked softly if something was bothering me. I hesitated, then dropped a hint of insecurity, telling her I wasn't sure if I was enough for her anymore. Immediately, she reached out with comforting words, swearing I was more than enough, insisting she couldn't even imagine losing me. She called me her perfect lover. But her words bounced off a wall inside my chest. I brushed her off and claimed I was fine, then feigned exhaustion. Eventually, I heard her crying quietly beside me. Not once did I feel sympathy. I wondered, were those tears of guilt? Or was she crying because I wasn't treating her like the queen she imagined herself to be? Before sunrise, I quietly slipped out of bed, grabbed the voice-activated recorder, and placed it under the driver's seat in her car. After that, I checked the previous night's recordings. Everything had been captured clearly, every sound, every shadow, despite the low lighting. When Amy came downstairs, she was short with me, clearly still hurt from the night before. But her mood flipped instantly. Maybe the thought of her afternoon appointment with her boss was enough to brighten her day. I poured her a coffee and told her I'd be locked in my office all day. She explained she'd be out showing homes that afternoon and was hoping for a big sale, but promised she'd pick up the kids from school. When I kissed her cheek goodbye, she stopped me and complained that I hadn't said, "I love you." She needed those words. They were her daily security blanket. I apologized, claiming my mind was scattered. She stressed again how important those words were to her. I promised I wouldn't forget. And as I walked out the door, the only thought in my head was, the next woman I say, "I love you," to, will be someone I can actually trust. Her claim that she'd be showing houses all afternoon told me everything I needed to know. I expected she'd be with her real partner, the man she'd chosen behind my back. I was done playing the blind fool. I wanted this entire nightmare exposed already. I spent the morning working, though my eyes kept drifting to the clock. When noon finally hit, I stepped out of my office, told my secretary I'd be gone for a while, and put my plan into motion. I borrowed a company van and parked it across from my own home. Then I waited. Just after 1 p.m., she pulled into the driveway, opened the garage, and parked inside without closing the door. I knew what that meant. She wasn't staying. She was preparing. 10 minutes later, my suspicion was confirmed. The same car I'd seen the day I caught them rolled right into my garage, into my spot. Just as he'd rolled into my wife's life, pushing me out without hesitation. The garage door closed behind him. The boldness of it, using my home, my bed, my space, was unreal. They clearly believed they were invincible. Or worse, they just didn't care. But that fantasy was about to crumble. As I watched the scene unfold, and knowing I'd soon have crystal clear footage of their betrayal, the weight of 13 years finally hit me. I began crying, quiet, painful tears I couldn't hold back anymore. For over a decade, I believed my wife couldn't cheat on me. That loyalty meant something. But now doubts hit me like tidal waves. Was he better in bed? More attractive? More exciting? Neither of us were extraordinary, so why risk everything? I wanted to storm in. I wanted to rip that house apart. But to what end? I'd already caught them once. What would a second confrontation prove? I knew if I confronted him directly, anger would take over. And jail time wasn't worth either of them. My kids were the only thing that mattered. Around 2:30 they were done. The garage opened, he drove away, and 15 minutes later Amy left too. I knew she'd return with the kids by 3:30, so I slipped inside, parked in the garage, and went straight to my office. I didn't watch everything, just enough to confirm the recordings were secure on my hard drive. It wasn't a copy-paste repeat of what I caught the first time, but it was explicit and disgusting. They started on the kitchen table, where my family ate every day. They even joked about how many times they'd done things right there while I sat clueless, eating dinner in the same spot. Then they moved to the bedroom. At one point, her lover suggested trying my daughter's room for a change of scenery. My wife refused, drawing a line she apparently didn't want to cross. So they returned to the main bedroom instead. No declarations of love. No romance. Just lust dressed up as entertainment. And every few minutes, my wife praising him as the best lover she'd ever had. When they finished, they wandered into the living room and continued on the rug by the fireplace. When it was finally over, she didn't even bother changing the sheets. I assumed she'd do that before picking up the kids to erase the evidence. I shut everything down and left the house without even checking the bed. I'd seen more than enough. My heart felt like stone, but beneath it was a burning anger rising higher and hotter by the second. And somewhere in that heat, I felt the smallest, darkest smile. Because the fire I was about to unleash on the two of them, they could never imagine. I sat down with Roy and laid everything out for him, every ugly detail, every bit of proof. He listened with the same stunned disbelief I'd wrestled with myself. Like me, he couldn't understand how someone who claimed to be a loving wife, a woman who took vows with me, could not only break them but then mock me behind my back, praising another man as if he were somehow superior. Those thoughts dragged me into a dark emotional pit, a place so heavy and suffocating it took everything I had just to stay focused on the mission. Destroy them both and reclaim whatever was left of my dignity. The first step was finding a divorce lawyer who wouldn't let Amy tear me apart financially. Roy recommended using the same law firm our company worked with for major cases. I made a call, spoke with a corporate attorney, and he provided 3 names, lawyers with reputations for defending husbands who were being blindsided. The first was retiring and unavailable. The second, thankfully, agreed to meet me the next afternoon at 3 p.m. With that locked in, I made a plan. In the morning, I would cancel credit cards, move money, and change every beneficiary tied to my name. When I got home that night, Amy was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove while the kids worked quietly in their rooms. She was wearing a yellow sundress, the kind she knew I loved, and for a moment my heart cracked again. She looked so radiant, so normal, so untouched by guilt. She welcomed me home with a bright smile and asked about my day, telling me hers had been amazing because she'd made a big sale. I pretended to care. In reality, I already knew the real reason behind her cheerfulness. I casually asked if anything else happened that afternoon, anyone interesting she crossed paths with. She shook her head and said her day was strictly business, work, home, family. A perfect little lie, polished and practiced. Upstairs, while changing clothes, I noticed the sheets had been replaced and the room smelled freshly aired out. When I returned to the kitchen, I mentioned seeing water on the shower floor and asked if she'd showered earlier. The way she froze told me everything. She denied it immediately, saying maybe the drain was backing up. I joked, lightly but pointedly, that maybe someone had snuck in for a quick rendezvous and cleaned up afterward. She forced a laugh, though I could see the tension in her eyes. Dinner was stiff and hollow. At one point, I switched seats with her, which clearly threw her off. She looked confused and barely touched her food, just pushed it around her plate. The kids carried most of the conversation while Amy and I sat in silence, offering the occasional comment. After the dishes were done, I retreated to my office. There, I spent the next hour reviewing the day's footage, selecting the clearest still images and preparing them for printing. I also drafted the wording for the posters I planned to make with those photos. All the pieces were slowly falling into place. When I finally headed to bed, she was already lying there with her back turned. Whether she was asleep or just pretending didn't matter. My behavior throughout the evening had definitely shaken her, and honestly, that tiny sliver of unease felt like the first and only justice she'd experienced so far. It was Tuesday. She had mentioned she'd be closing another sale on Thursday. That was the signal, the day she and her lover were planning their next meeting. It would also be the day I ended everything. The next morning, I left before she even opened her eyes. I needed a head start. Since my appointment with the lawyer wasn't until the afternoon, I had hours to get all the financial chess moves in place. First stop, HR. I changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance and 401k from Amy to our kids, Shelby and Ryan. The HR rep gave me a strange look, but I didn't owe her, or anyone, an explanation. Next, I canceled every joint credit card and applied for new ones under my name only. Then I went straight to the bank and withdrew half the money from our joint checking and savings accounts, depositing it all into a separate bank solely in my name. As for the house, I figured the courts would probably let Amy stay there with the kids, so I held off on making any big moves until I talked things through with my lawyer. At 3 p.m. I met him. He was professional enough, though blunt. He explained that since we lived in a no-fault divorce state, Amy would almost definitely get primary custody of the kids. I'd lose the house and half of everything else, even with proof of her infidelity. I told him exactly how I wanted the petition written. He was skeptical, insisting I was being unrealistic with my demands. I assured him I could persuade her to sign whatever I put in front of her. He didn't like it, but he agreed and promised everything would be ready for her to be served Friday morning. I also instructed him to prepare a lawsuit against her boss and his company for deliberately destroying my marriage. Those papers would be ready Friday too. When I got home that evening, I stayed cold and distant. Honestly, I was done pretending. The only thing left was to finish pulling everything apart so I could start rebuilding my life without her in it. After a quiet, half-hearted dinner, I went straight to my study, printed the photos and finalized the signs. Then I drafted a letter to Greg Ryan's wife. I included clear, high-resolution copies of the photos and let her know that I had hours of video evidence ready for her if she chose to file for divorce, just like I was doing. Around 11 p.m., I went to the bedroom to make sure Amy was asleep. Then I slipped out to her car, retrieved the voice recorder, rewound it, and listened. The recording captured her half of a conversation with Greg. She thanked him for the wonderful afternoon and told him she already missed him. She talked about the possibility of spending an entire week together, planning a fake story about a mandatory real estate convention. She said she had to give Justin, me, just enough attention to keep him pacified, even though she wished she could be with Greg full-time. They confirmed their plans for Thursday. Then the call ended. And surprisingly, hearing her say those things didn't gut me the way it once had. Maybe the pain had simply burned itself out. Maybe I was finally hollow enough to stop feeling it. Maybe, deep down, some small part of me still believed there was a shred of hope left. But she had no idea how close she was to handing herself over to him completely, and forever. What she didn't realize was that in less than 24 hours, every illusion of safety she clung to would collapse in one violent sweep. The thought of that, of finally ripping apart the comfortable little fantasy they had built, filled me with a dark, steady satisfaction I had never known before. Revenge, I learned, isn't just a feeling. It's a force with teeth. I replaced the tape with a fresh one, slid the recorder back beneath her car seat, and silently prayed it would capture every tremor, every panic-filled whisper when her world finally caved in. I barely slept that night, not from heartbreak. I had passed heartbreak long ago. No. I lay awake because anticipation itself was electrifying. Every hour brought me closer to the moment everything would come crashing down exactly the way I planned. The last morning. For the last time, I rose from the bed while Cher slept, oblivious. I stood there for a moment, watching the woman who had once been my entire future. The mother of my children, the partner I imagined growing old with. My eyes stung as the truth settled like lead in my chest. This was the final morning we would ever share the same bed. No more passion. No more whispered plans for tomorrow. No more intertwined futures. Ours had ended long before she realized it. I dressed, showered, and stepped out of the house, wondering if she had even the faintest idea how much her betrayal was about to cost her. Somehow I doubted it, but she would learn, very soon. After grabbing breakfast at a diner, I swung by the office just long enough to tell my secretary I'd be out for the day. Then I called Roy, brought him up to speed, and he wished me luck, though he warned me to be careful. I checked in with my lawyer next, confirming everything was set for serving both Cher and Greg Ryan the following morning. Then I called my wife to tell her I'd be picking up the kids after school. My mother wanted them for the long weekend, and Cher acted thrilled, thanking me, even throwing in a seductive, "Maybe we can spend Saturday in bed together." I replied casually, pretending not to hear the poison behind the sweetness. I was far beyond caring. The trap springs shut. By 12:30, I was parked near the house, mostly hidden but with a perfect view of the driveway. I didn't need to watch the garage door. They were predictable, almost laughably so. Right on schedule, 12:50, Amy's car pulled in. 5 minutes later, Greg Ryan arrived. The trap closed behind them without a sound. You'd think I would have been crushed knowing they were together in my bed. But I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was like watching some cheap, poorly written adult film. No plot, no emotional weight, just noise. A bad production with an ending I personally scripted. 10 minutes before 3, Ryan's car backed out of the driveway. A few minutes later, Cher followed, touching up her lipstick as she drove off. Perfect. Once they were gone, I pulled into the garage and hurried inside. I had only a short window. I transferred the footage, watched enough to confirm every insult and every degrading comparison was on record, then secured the files. I carried the posters and their photos upstairs to stage for later. After packing a few essentials for Shelby and Ryan, I paused for a moment, feeling the single sharp twist of guilt that still remained, their pain. My children didn't deserve any of this. But I reminded myself, I didn't tear our family apart. She did. The wheels of consequence begin to turn. At 3:15, I picked up the kids, told them Grandma wanted them for the weekend, and dropped them off 45 minutes later. They were thrilled, as kids always are when spoiled grandparents are involved. Then I returned home and set the rest of the plan into motion. And that leads us back to where everything began. The furniture strewn across the lawn, posters propped up for the whole neighborhood to see, the truth waiting like a loaded weapon. I expected Cher to call immediately, but she didn't. Her phone rang once, just silence on the other end. An hour later, the police arrived. They were sympathetic but firm. I had to remove the signs and the photos or face charges for disturbing the peace. Fair enough. They had already served their purpose. Cher saw them. And the look on her face before I turned away told me that her downfall had finally begun. That night, I drowned myself in Maker's Mark and passed out. Friday, the collapse. Morning hit me like a hammer. The hangover was brutal, but beneath it, I felt strong. Stronger than I'd felt in months. By noon, the lawn was cleared. Only the mattress and stained sheets remained, which I tossed later. Then at 3 p.m., the real chaos began. Greg Ryan's wife had clearly received my package. The law firm had served Cher, Greg, and his partners. Cher collapsed crying. Greg's fury exploded. His partners hid in a room for 15 minutes before emerging to fire him on the spot. The company invoked a morality clause, cutting ties with both him and his mistress. Then the receptionist reported that Greg's wife was on the phone, demanding to speak with him. She had received the photos and the letter. Divorce was on the way. By the time he was escorted out, the entire office had turned their backs on Cher. She lay on the floor crying for half an hour before dragging herself out. No one knew where she went. The call that changed nothing. The next day she finally called. Her voice was wrecked, fear, guilt, desperation tangled together. She asked about the kids. I reassured her they were safe and they didn't know the details. She thanked me, asked to stop by for clothes. I agreed. She wanted to talk. I refused. She broke again, sobbing apologies, insisting she never meant to hurt me. I laughed. Her words to Greg said otherwise. She claimed she only said those things to boost his ego, because he'd always complained about his wife. I reminded her she tore me down to do it. That she'd been with him for 6 months. That I had recordings of every word. She tried to deny it. But denial was useless. The truth was recorded, permanent, unchangeable. She kept insisting, over and over, that she never meant to hurt me, that none of the words she'd said to Greg were real. When I pushed her further, demanding an explanation that actually made sense, she finally cracked. She admitted that what she had with Greg felt filthy, and so she allowed herself to behave in a filthy way with him, as if keeping that ugliness separate from what she claimed she shared with me, something she called clean and loving, somehow made her betrayal less monstrous. I stared at the phone in disbelief. That was her justification. I told her exactly what I thought of that twisted logic. I called it sick, disturbing. and then admitted my own stupidity for ignoring the signs for far too long. She begged, then truly begged. She said she loved only me, that she belonged to me. She pleaded for forgiveness, swearing she would show up at my door that very moment if it meant keeping me from leaving. But it was too late. I told Cher that whatever love I once had for her had died long before this call. She was the one who walked away from me 6 months ago when she started giving herself to another man. I reminded her that her actions proved beyond question that she didn't love me. The disgust in my voice wasn't intentional, but it was impossible to hide. I wanted her gone from my life as quickly as possible. There was no future for us, not after everything she had done. I told her I would maintain contact only for the sake of our children, children she herself had deeply wounded. I wouldn't shield her from the consequences of her choices. She had earned every shard of pain she was now choking on. When she demanded to know why I had told Greg's wife about the affair, I answered without hesitation. Because what she and Greg had done wasn't just unfair, it was catastrophic. They ripped my family apart. They shattered vows we once swore to protect. And Greg's wife deserved the truth just as much as I did. Cher said she wanted to fight for us, that she didn't want the marriage to end. I laughed bitterly. There was nothing left to fight for. I told her outright I would rather be dead than chained to her again. I told her she was delusional if she thought anything remained between us besides legal obligations. Then she shifted. Her tone turned sharp, calculating. She urged me to read the divorce petition she had served me. She promised that if I agreed to joint custody, I could stay in the house and receive half our assets. And then she threatened me. If I didn't cooperate, she said she would release the videos of her affair out of pure hatred for me. I doubted she had the nerve. She insisted she did. She begged me to sign. I refused, and told her she should sign instead. After I hung up, she eventually did. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. She now lives with Shelby and Ryan in what used to be our home. I moved into a condo nearby so the kids wouldn't have their lives disrupted more than they already were. They still carry the weight of the separation, but little by little, they're learning to live with it. Shelby told me once that her mother admitted the truth, that she'd made a terrible mistake and our marriage couldn't survive it. At least she didn't lie to them. And her parents still speak to me, so I assume she didn't try shifting all the blame onto my shoulders. My mother simply said neither of us could find a path back after what happened. Before letting go completely, I retrieved the recorder from Cher's car one last time. What it held was unforgettable. It captured her calling Greg to thank him for everything, worrying aloud that I seemed suspicious and suggesting they put things on pause for a bit. Then it recorded the exact moment she returned home and found the signs and photographs, the evidence of what I knew. Panic hit her instantly. She called Greg again, sobbing uncontrollably, telling him I knew everything. It's been over a year now since the storm finally broke, and I'm still rebuilding what's left of myself. Dating? Not a chance. I'm nowhere near ready to roll the dice on another heartbreak, not after clawing my way out of the nightmare I survived. The wounds are still raw. The scars still burn. Shelby once told me her mother tried going on a date, but she came home in tears. As far as the kids know, she hasn't seen anyone since. She's working as a receptionist at a retirement village these days, her once thriving real estate career frozen in time. Whether she still speaks to Greg Ryan, I genuinely don't know. And honestly, I don't care. Greg's wife divorced him too. Rumor is he's struggling to find work. Even though I never released the recordings, everyone knew enough. In this world, companies don't want to hire the guy who can't keep his hands off married women, who turns families into collateral damage. I blurred Cher's face in every video, but the audio? I kept every second. For clarity. For closure. For truth. I heard Greg's ex-wife is dating again. A good man this time. A police officer. And it's serious. Good for her. She deserves peace after the betrayal she endured. As for Greg's former employer, they offered me a very generous settlement to avoid an ugly public lawsuit. I accepted. That chapter is over, sealed, buried, done. Now, my energy is exactly where it belongs. On my kids. On their healing. On their future. And maybe, when enough time has softened the ache, I'll start imagining a future for myself again. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. This is Dark Infidelity Stories, where broken trust becomes powerful truth.